Okay, um, this is my 13th book, and number 14 is coming out very shortly, which is a follow-up to this book. This book takes the Catoctin Farmers Club from 1868 until 1920, and the follow-up takes it from 1920 until the near present. So it's basically a history of agriculture, and one must realize that Loudoun County was the #1 agricultural county in Virginia from time immemorial until 1958. In 1958, when land started to be cleared for Dulles International Airport, that was the big change. And Sterling Park helped along too. I'm a member of the Catoctin Farmers Club. There are 3 farmers clubs in Loudoun County. This one, which is the oldest, founded in 1868. There's the Lovettsville Farmers Club dating from 1913. And there is the Planters Club dating from 1915. And all the other clubs are going strong today, as well as the Catoctin Farmers Club. This book is somewhat unique in the sense that it does have the diary of a Catoctin farmer in it. And I first should thank John Souders, a Waterford historian, for transcribing this diary, some 400 typewritten pages. And I've put it into about 40 pages, but it shows the diary of the only one that we know of a farmer from the year 1869 to 1886. And it's a very detailed agricultural picture of our county at that particular time. I'm not exactly sure where I should begin. I started farming myself in Loudoun County in 1968. So that puts me, I guess, as one of the older farmers in the area. Not as old as some, but anyway, enough to remember it when it was a county full of dirt roads and very little else. And we all enjoyed the presence of rurality, so to speak. I wrote a preface to this book, and I'm going to read it because it's from a Russian author by the name of Nikolai Gogol. And it's from his book called Dead Souls. And in it, he's speaking of the life of a farmer. Quote, "A farmer has no time to be bored. There is no emptiness in his life. It is all fullness. You have only to look at the varied round of the year's work that does truly elevate the spirit, to say nothing of its variety. In it, a man goes hand in hand with nature, with the seasons of the year, and is in touch with and is in sympathy with everything that is done in creation." Again, from the Russian writer Nikolai Gogol, the book Dead Souls. It's not paginated, but it's from chapter 3, written in 1842. I have another quote which I'd like to read to you. A correspondent from the Norfolk Ledger, a newspaper in 1881, said this about our area. Western Loudoun is a land in which the conglomerate limestone abounds, the constant disintegration of which restores the soil. This is the finest agricultural region I have ever seen. Loudoun is peopled with a steady, slow-moving, industrious, and hard-working race. Another quote that hit my eye from the University of Virginia in 1926. Speaking about our county, when we find a people living on their own land and raising their own food, we find them in a state of prosperity and happiness that makes for a nation built upon the strength of the land and the tillers thereof. So, I don't know whether I should say any more. It is sort of all in this book, at least from 1868 to 1920. And as I mentioned, the second edition is coming out shortly to be published by the Oak Spring Garden Foundation, which will cover not only Loudoun, but Loudoun, Fauquier, and Clark counties from 1920 until the near present. So, any questions? I can't say much more. Yes, sir.
I presume it's coverage of the component of technology, tractors, and chemical fertilizers. I assume there's some discussion of the early days of all of that arriving and what the farmers thought at the time in the book.
There is actually an extended chapter in the new book on the controversy over DDT. Now that may seem not very germane at the moment, but from the end of World War II until DDT was outlawed, and I might mention before it was outlawed, just about every farmer in Loudoun County stored up on it because they thought it was very good. But there was one Catoctin farmer by the name of John Churchill Newcomb who spoke against the grain at the time. And in the book, it mentions that he was probably the only farmer at the time, and we're speaking now 1940s, right after World War II, that realized that there could be some drawbacks to DDT. The big agricultural community at the time, I should say the consensus of the agricultural community at the time was that DDT was sort of a savior of the crop, the world of cropping. And John Churchill Newcomb of the Catoctin Farmers Club spoke heartily against it. He met a tragic demise later that some of you might know about at Dunvegan. And That's about the end of that story, I guess. Any other comments or questions? Yes, sir.
Scheel, pleasure to see you. By the way, I bought your book 6 months ago. It's starting again. While I was reading it, there was something that kept going on in the back of my mind, which is in 1968, CBS News had a special called Hunger in America. And they highlighted 4 or 5 places. One of them was the Navajo Reservation. The other was Southern California, the Mexican workers. There was Alabama and Loudoun County. Loudoun County and Highland was one of the great places of hunger in America. What they said in this thing was that there were 6,000 households who were malnourished, and they were mostly tenant farmers. And that's in the back of my mind when I'm reading this about these farmers and their prosperity. But at the same time, there's these 6,000 families, and they went around, you can see people totally malnourished, the dead looks, the children's eyes, the stripping hair, the things you see in a malnourished community. So I've just raised that. It struck me that there's an undercurrent, which are these guys ever discussing the fact that you have this huge underclass in rural Loudoun County?
Underclass in Loudoun County. I remember about 30 or 40 years ago, there was a agricultural agent in Loudoun County who wrote about the underclass in the county. And it made the Washington Post newspaper picked it up. And what essentially was the gist of this article was that while Loudoun nurtured some of the wealthiest farmers and prosperous farmers in Virginia, is that these individuals were supported by an underclass of tenant farmers who completely went unnoticed. And I don't recall any other follow-up. If someone other than myself remembers one, I'd like to know about it. But I do remember that controversy.
It was on YouTube. So we have 1968. It was a national report. It was really quite shocking. Well, it's shocking to me 67 years later. But I'm just wondering about these farmers. Do these guys have tenants, or these guys are farming completely their own land?
The Catoctin farmers have tenants. Some did, and some did not. I was a member of the Catoctin Farmers Club. I did not have any tenants. Dr. Joseph Rogers, who farmed 1,000 acres, then after his death, Donna took over. Yes, there were tenants on that spread, because how could one family take care of 1,000 acres?
What was the average size of the farms at that time?
It's in here.
Find a book.
Oh, God.
Oh,
Yeah, I think the average, anyway, I think I got the right thing. Okay, we're speaking on 1919. Because that's the last census that had a complete farming census for the county as a whole. And after 1919, to get totals, you have to add up on a farm by farm basis. Loudoun County is 330,880 acres. In 1919, the total farm acreage was 3,400. In other words, something like 81% of the county's land in 1919 was in farmland. That decreased, of course, not by a great deal. And in 1958, the county was the fourth ranked county in the area of agriculture, which gets complicated because you have to go from fruit-bearing trees to dairy cows to beef cattle to horses to sheep to hogs. And so all those added up, when you put them together, it really depends on which category you think is more important. Always the main counties in Virginia with agriculture were the largest, Augusta and Rockingham. And when we get down to our size of the county, Waukegan, which is a bit larger than Loudoun's 331,000 acres, ranks generally a bit ahead in all categories. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it goes into some sort of statistical area. There was a hand back, sorry, yeah. Pardon?
How did prohibition affect the farmers in this town? Prohibition, when generally I think of the grains grown by farmers to be used for making whiskey and
The question, how did prohibition, which extended from 1920 to 1933, affect the farmers of this county? I would say very little. Farmers who had spreads close by the Blue Ridge where there were stills, and it was rather commonplace that when you had a still and you knew that the revenue people were coming, you either dismantled it or decreased the size so the fine would be minimum. And but I think it affected the overall economy in a very small way. There were also stills in the lower part of the county. And I remember that the toll person who took tolls at the Broad Run Bridge, there was a toll house there. That he would also sell liquor at the same time. And so everybody would pick up their pint or whatever while they were paying the toll at the Broad Run Bridge. Gosh, when the tropical storm Agnes took away that bridge in 1973. And so that all went by the board.
You
been a large slaveholding county, before leading up to the Civil War, and if so, what happened to, the former slaves, in the period starting in 18?
The question was Loudoun County, a very large slaveholding county. That's relative. Gosh, I have somewhere the black population of the county, but about 20 through slaveholding times, the slaveholding populace of Loudoun County ran about 20 to 25% of the total populace. For comparisons, in Clark County, it was a little bit less, like 18%. But in Fauquier County, it was close to 50%. And Culpeper County, close to 50%. So the farther south in Virginia you went, the importance of slavery increased greatly.
And so what
Pardon?
became of the freedmen, in the post-Civil War era? Did they?
The freedmen, okay.
Did they move out?
The somewhere I have the figures of the free black population of the county. They're not hard to ferret out. But the ran about 15%, 12 to 15%, which was on the high edge of free blacks in Virginia. Fauquier County was a bit less, Clark slightly more, Frederick slightly more.
I just know anecdotally that some of the families we looked at in the post-Civil War period, you remember we were doing research around the Fontana Cemetery, over by Mountain Road. Many of the free blacks became farm laborers in the late 19th century. That's how the list of the census.
Trying to remember, we have the agricultural censuses for 1880 are available from 1840 through 1880. If you really wanted to research, you could do a complete job, because those censuses are complete. 1840, 1850 is somewhat different. 1850 was a census on the census of manufacturers. And so you'd have to pass on that. But then you have 1840, 60, 70, and 80 to work with. 1890, 1900, 1910, 1920, all those censuses were destroyed in the Department of Commerce building fire in 1921. And afterwards, the Census Bureau thought it was not viable to take a farm compendium for the entire county. And so you have to look at a farm by farm basis. So if you're looking for 1930 or 1940, you have to go through all the farms and do all the detail later yourself. Does that answer the question, I think? Can't remember. Okay. Any other questions you might have? Yes, sir.
What was the impact on the agriculture of the county from the Union burning of the mills and stores?
Say that again, about Indians?
What was the impact on the agriculture of the county of the Union burning mills and barns and stores? Did it recover quickly? Was it
Okay, we're talking about the Indians burning
the
down.
Union Army?
Oh, the Union Army, not the Indians. Very little of Loudoun County was, I think, destroyed during the Civil War. When you get down to Lower Fauquier and Culpeper, the situation is entirely different. And Mr. Chamberlain, if you had some, could you add to that?
There, you were on the path of the latest where work and learning of them before. We got a small lot of things to store in line. Now you found there one where kind of people can see where it's actually something that would be covered up. And just depended on where you were, in those areas where they destroyed. There were no major battles. You know, I mean, there's some maybe a lot that really did.
What was the impact of the burning raid in November? Pardon?
The burning raid did most of the work during the month. And it was fine.
Thank you.
I don't know much about it, but I read a few years ago that Goose Creek had an active canal system with lots of dams that was completely destroyed during the Civil War. I don't know much about it. I don't know how extensive it was, but
Sorry, I could not hear that very well.
Said the Goose Creek and several dams destroyed in the Civil War.
Okay, the question was Goose Creek dams destroyed during the Civil War. No, they were destroyed when the Goose Creek Canal came through at an earlier date in the 1840s, 1850s. And they took away the various dams and mills at Goose Creek. Yes, sir.
in the book, a laborer and
John, I can't hear you.
And I think work on the farm at the top of the road, and I wanted to do anything about him. And specifically, he related to all of Black Jones people who live in Florida.
Anyway, I still don't get the whole gist now. Okay.
And he's done it. Mentioned in the book, he mentioned him as a laborer for one of the farms near Waterford. And I wondered if you knew what many times he had to the Black Joneses of Waterford.
I'm done. Yeah. Okay. Question is, I mentioned in the book Henry Jones, a black laborer, but I didn't know anything further about whether the connection was to the Joneses of Waterford on that. Yes.
Gene, if you think about this volume, 1868 to 1920, and you were to summarize the biggest change that you saw in that half a century, what jumps out at you?
Okay, the biggest change between 1868 and 1920 in farming would certainly, I think, be mechanization, which came in the early 20th century. Not complete mechanization from motors, but horse-drawn mechanization, pulled drawn. And the change from the handheld plow. And I guess I have a picture of the handheld plow on the back of the book there. To horse-pulled machinery was the great change. Of course, when you start to think of the 1930s and 1940s, when you start to have machinery like windrowers and whatever that could cut a 10-acre field in a matter of an hour and a half, machinery gets more complicated, and it's almost beyond my knowledge. I'd have to ask the planks here to help me out on that. But
Usually before the Q&A, we pass the hat. You notice we don't charge admission, we don't sell tickets to these lectures. We do appreciate it. We will pass the hat or basket. Get what you can and just continue to do it.
okay, okay, so
Why don't we not the online form? How does it be created?
the Catoctin Farmers Club was formed because Simon Elliott Chamberlain, a Civil War veteran, who you'll hear a lot about in ensuing weeks, found himself in the ownership of a 160-acre farm, and he didn't have the slightest idea on how to run it. But he was fairly good at organizing, and so he decided, I'm going to start a farmers club. And when the farmers club meets, they can tell me how to run this farm and plantation. And so that's how the Catoctin Farmers Club started. When Simon Elliott Chamberlain realized that he was out of his element and he needed help from pillars of the soil.
But it can't go in one hand.
It kept going to the surprise of everybody. And there are comments in the 1880s, people wondering, how did the CFC, meaning Catoctin Farmers Club, keep going? But it just did. It was one of those things that never quite did. And it still keeps going. I guess the last meeting we had was the bus. Yep, the new book. Okay. Yeah. But I think the last meeting, or one of the last meetings, was at our house in January. And we had 9 or 8 present. And actually, we have 2 lady members of the Catoctin Farmers Club, Marilyn Evans and Donna Rogers. And I think we are the only one of the 3 farmers clubs in the county to have lady members. So you might consider us liberal. But I remember Chip, didn't you once say that we wanted Chip Frank to join the Catoctin Farmers Club? This was, what, 30, 40 years ago. And he said, I'm not gonna join because you don't have any women members. Anyway, Chip, you can join that.
The image I've had stated is that these are long-lived organizations. They meet with great regularity, and they start by reading minutes from 25 years ago, or minutes from 10 years ago, something like that. They had stuff dense continuity, historic questions, and love. But there's this long stream of self-organization. I mean, you're really just saying it. I'm just repeating myself. The precedent is.
I really can't comment on that, yeah. But it's a very interesting observation. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Were there any controversies or challenges between 18 and 1920 that your fire first had to deal with controversies or disagreements within the club?
The controversy over what was it?
Were there any?
The controversies over
Anything.
I say the biggest controversy of modern time was DDT. It was finally outlawed, I think, by the Environmental Protection Agency. I can't remember the year, maybe 1972. And it came in right after World War I, or World War II, 1945. So that controversy lasted, nearly 30 years as to whether it should be used or not. Most of the agricultural agents in the county did not think that DDT was harmful. I mean, that was the official line, so to speak. Yes, ma'am. Boy, pardon?
It took a consumer effort. The book Silent Spring by Rachel Carter in the 1970s really was a bestseller for years. It was a shock to the American people that there was a link between insecticides or other man-made products and the natural world. And it really heroic farmers who began to understand the link between these activities and pollution and destruction of valuable insects, birds, really the whole eco praise of the
That was the famous book, Rachel Carson's
Silent
Silent Spring.
Spring, and it was a bestseller. I just had to enter the book this in the early 1970s.
Good point.
And it was massive and shocking and controversial, and it then led to the banning not only of DDT but the much more serious scientific balancing act on products that were coming in, not just to the water or the air, but I believe it did start with the land. It started with farmers, and then we mentioned here in Loudoun, who were voices crying in the wilderness for a number of years. I hope some of them lived long enough to be their families that they were vindicated, that those concerns were very real.
So again, the main farmer that I know who is against it was John Churchill Newcomb, who is a member of the Catoctin Farmers Club. And that's how I happen to know of that particular name. Arthur Godfrey and DDT in your book. I think so. Not in this one. Arthur Godfrey was important because back during the 1960s and 70s, and maybe earlier, a lot of cattle were dying from a malady called grass tetany. And it always seemed to come in the spring when there was a lot of rain. Well, what was happening was that prior to DDT, the chief pesticide was a poison. I don't want to say Paris green, because the Paris green was even before that. But it was
Arsenic.
yeah,
Arsenic.
had lead arsenate in it. And the lead arsenate, the arsenic would remain in the roots of the plants. And whenever there was a rainy spring, cattle would not only eat the plant, but they'd eat some of the roots too. And they'd have arsenic poison, which was called grass tetany. A cow would get down and just wouldn't get up again. I think some people called it bloat. Did you have any problems with that? No, okay. Boy, I had. And it was all because of the lead arsenate in the soil. Because prior to DDT, the main spray was lead arsenate. And it remained in the roots of plants. That was a good question, I remember. And Arthur Godfrey was one of the people, because he had a large spread, who started to do research in that and realized that this was the problem. And so it was his research that set the movement to get rid of DDT going. Thank you for that reminder. Yes.
Yeah, I was researching a farm for agriculture history. What records are available? And you go to the Department of Agriculture, get into that issue with county agents, or I know that.
I'm gonna have to go here. Okay. Research what aspect of it?
Not all straight at a farm back there 100 years. What records that are available in the county agent that you can get into, or I know about the census bureau, and is there anything out there that really help you out?
Yes, but I'm gonna have to think of what.
Small library.
Who can help me on that one right off? Ma'am?
Yeah, they go back and check files like that years ago, they have a separate file in one. That's open records.
You know, just go to the main library in Leesburg and ask the librarians for telephone reference sources that, here, she probably could give you an outline of where that information might be with it.
Remember, records on a farm by farm basis exist. Up until a certain year, I exactly tell you with the year. And then the Department of Agriculture got into it, said that farming was really a secondary occupation. And we really didn't need to know everything on a farm by farm basis. So they just lumped everything together. And I can't immediately recall what year that was. I want to say 1939, but I'm not sure. I know it was 1940 when for the first year the farms owned by black people and the farms owned by white people, that was the last year that you could make a comparison between black-owned farms and white-owned farms. And after 1940, they were lumped together. So what was then considered possibly a racist type of record keeping was very valuable in the long run because it showed the disparity in records. I can't think of anybody who has immediately done any research, or detailed research on that, and if anybody can help me on it, I'd appreciate it.
What about the Loudoun Heritage Farm Museum?
I don't know, Taylor, did you get?
I did this year in on the session. I recall, and I gave the and what I did when you put them together, you have two under the then you see at 50 years pretty well, and then 60, then you see when my great grandfather takes over, there's a decline, which is partly this fall, I'm going to do it. But it's also becomes a more drop. Then it becomes under a tenant farm in the 80s, and you see suddenly the production then goes up, as Gene said. So instead of trying to spend it down, and then you get up to the 540%. So you could probably just continue that. But you actually get that information, you can see it follow by policy every 10 years. And it's really deep.
Find out
yeah, you'll see what they're
The Loudoun Heritage Farm Museum does have the book collection of the Catoctin Farmers Club, which contains a myriad of, oh gosh, I can't remember how many volumes, maybe 140 of books on farming, mostly from the 19th century. I mention that, but anybody who would be doing any research on agriculture in this area would be a good idea to look at that collection, because I think it's the largest collection. The club gave it to the Loudoun Heritage Farm Museum because they could keep the books in a climate controlled environment. And they had been in the basement of the old Waterford School before that. Yes.
Farm products and livestock, or was it disturbing Loudoun County, or was it going down to Washington D.C. with Don? Understand the reach of the impact of all the farmers that are raised in the county or within the top farmers.
Most of the farm produce in Loudoun County was going to the Washington D.C. area. Some was going west, but most was going to the Washington D.C., some into Prince William County or south in Stafford. But it was basically Washington oriented. And especially in the dairy industry. Yes.
I looked before, but I've never practiced. You mentioned about the use of horse-drawn farm vehicles became much more popular and more widespread after the Civil War. Do we have any understanding of figures on the horse mortality rate post-war? We know that hundreds of thousands of horses were either killed during battle, not only in Loudoun, obviously, but all over Virginia, West Virginia. How quickly do you think, or does anyone think, these farmers were able to have access to healthy enough animals to be able to be part of the new horse driven vehicles that farmers were using? It sounded like they were able to use them right away. So post-war, were there enough animals here to at the time, or did it take some years?
So what was the basic question you had?
And wherever during the war engagements, we know they were extremely high. We know if they were really in the hundreds of thousands.
Talk about the Civil War?
During the war, yes. And so in 1865, was there still a healthy horse population for?
Oh, okay.
Plowing that you had mentioned, or did it just rebound somehow? Quickly enough that it was not a problem.
I think my book goes into that. The equine census is very specific on that the number of horses per farm in 1865 was far fewer than it was in 1870 or 1869. I can't give you the exact statistics, but they are in that book. And you're right, there was a complete, horses were extremely valuable. Horse thievery, that was a 20-year sentence stealing a horse. So it gives you an idea of how important that was.
All right, that's it for questions. Let's get a change. We'll make one.